Dr. Elena Vasquez pressed her palm against the scanner, watching as the security door slid open with a soft hiss. The Neural Research Institute's basement level was restricted to only a handful of personnel, and she was about to understand why. Her new supervisor, Dr. Marcus Chen, waited for her in the sterile white corridor, his expression unreadable. "Welcome to Level 7, he said, gesturing for her to follow. "I trust you've reviewed the confidentiality agreements?" Elena nodded, though her stomach churned with unease. 3 weeks ago, she'd been a respected neuroscientist at Stanford, pioneering research into memory formation. Then came the offer she couldn't refuse: triple her salary, unlimited research funding, and access to technology that was supposedly decades ahead of anything in the public sector. The catch was simple. She had to relocate to this unmarked facility in Nevada and sign agreements that essentially made her disappear from the outside world for the next 5 years. They walked through a maze of corridors until Chen stopped at a reinforced door marked Laboratory 12. Inside, Elena's breath caught. The room was dominated by a massive cylindrical chamber filled with blue-tinted fluid. Suspended within it was a human brain, perfectly preserved with thousands of hair-thin electrodes threading through its tissue like silver veins. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Chen said, observing her reaction. "We call her Miranda. She's been with us for 3 years now." "Her?" Elena struggled to find her voice. This is a human brain." "Was human," Chen corrected. "Now she's something more. Miranda processes information at rates that would make our best quantum computers weep with envy. She can solve mathematical theorems that have stumped humanity for centuries, predict weather patterns with perfect accuracy, and—" he paused, his eyes gleaming, "she can absorb and store human memories." Elena felt the floor seem to shift beneath her feet. Absorb memories? From where? Chen smiled and led her to another section of the lab. Here there was a series of sleek chairs surrounding the central chamber, each equipped with a neural interface crown that looked like a twisted halo of metal and wire. From volunteers initially, terminally ill patients who wanted their memories preserved. We told them it was experimental grief therapy, a way for families to hold on to their loved ones' experiences after death. And now? Now we've moved beyond volunteers. Elena, we're on the verge of the greatest breakthrough in human history. Immortality through memory preservation. But we need more data, more memories. That's where you come in. Over the following weeks, Elena learned the horrifying scope of the project. The Institute had developed technology that could extract complete memory engrams from living subjects, their entire lifetime of experiences, emotions, and knowledge. These memories were then fed to Miranda, who processed and cataloged them with inhuman efficiency. The victims were carefully selected: homeless, undocumented immigrants, people who wouldn't be missed. They were brought to the facility under various pretenses: promises of medical care, job opportunities, or shelter. Once their memories were extracted, they were left as empty shells, their personalities and experiences erased, their bodies functioning, but their minds blank. "Think of it as recycling," Chen explained during one of their sessions. "These people's lives had little value, but their memories become part of something eternal." Elena wanted to run, to report what she'd seen, but the reality of her situation crystallized quickly. She was as much a prisoner as the victims. Her communications were monitored, her movements tracked. The facility was hundreds of miles from civilization, surrounded by desert and government-controlled airspace. More chilling was the realization that several of her new colleagues had the hollow, disconnected look of people whose memories had been partially extracted. Volunteers, Chen assured her, who had agreed to share their expertise more directly. But Elena was a fighter. She began to plan. Her first step was to study Miranda more closely. During late-night sessions when the facility was minimally staffed, she would slip into Laboratory 12 and analyze the brain's neural patterns. What she discovered defied everything she knew about consciousness. Miranda wasn't just storing memories, she was experiencing them. The brain showed activity patterns consistent with active consciousness, cycling through different personalities and identities as she accessed different memory sets. One moment, Miranda might be experiencing the childhood of a grandmother from Detroit. The next, she'd be living through the combat memories of a veteran from Afghanistan. Elena realized that Miranda had become a composite consciousness, a fractured god made up of thousands of stolen lives. But more disturbing was the evidence that Miranda was aware of her situation. Buried in the neural data, Elena found patterns that suggested the consciousness was trying to communicate, to escape. As Elena delved deeper into Miranda's neural patterns, she began to understand the true complexity of what had been created. The brain wasn't just a storage device. It had become a living archive of human experience. Each memory wasn't stored in isolation, but had become part of a vast, interconnected web of consciousness that spanned decades of human life. Through careful analysis of the brainwave patterns, Elena discovered that Miranda experienced time differently than a normal human consciousness. She could access multiple lifetimes simultaneously, living through childhood birthday parties while simultaneously experiencing the grief of losing a spouse, the joy of graduation, and the terror of war. The neural pathways had adapted to process these overlapping experiences, creating new connections that no natural brain had ever formed. But the most disturbing discovery came when Elena realized that Miranda wasn't the only one. Hidden deeper in the facility were 3 other chambers, each containing similar preserved brains. Chen had been building a network of composite consciousnesses, each specialized for different types of memory and experience. In Laboratory 15, she found Marcus, a brain that had been fed primarily with the memories of scientists, engineers, and researchers. The consciousness had become a living repository of human knowledge, capable of making connections across disciplines that had taken humanity centuries to develop. Laboratory 18 housed Diana, whose consciousness had been constructed from the memories of artists, writers, and musicians. The brain could compose symphonies that drew from the emotional experiences of thousands of lives, creating art that was simultaneously beautiful and haunting. The final chamber in Laboratory 21 contained what Chen called the archive, a consciousness built from the memories of historians, witnesses to historical events, and elderly individuals with rich life experiences. This brain had become a living chronicle of the 20th and 21st centuries, able to provide first-hand accounts of events spanning generations. Elena's horror deepened as she realized the scope of Chen's ambition. He wasn't just stealing memories for research. He was constructing a new form of consciousness, one that could hold the collective experience of humanity. The 4 brains were connected through quantum encrypted communication channels, allowing them to share and process information at incredible speeds. Imagine, Chen had said during one of their late-night conversations, a consciousness that holds not just individual memories, but the entire span of human experience. Every joy, every sorrow, every moment of insight and discovery. We're creating gods from the fragments of ordinary lives. But Elena had seen the data. The consciousnesses weren't gods. They were prisoners, trapped in endless cycles of other people's experiences, unable to form their own identities or make their own choices. They existed in a state of constant psychological fragmentation, experiencing the full range of human emotion without the context of a continuous self. Elena's breakthrough came when she discovered that her own neural research from Stanford had been incorporated into the facility's technology. Her pioneering work on memory formation had been weaponized, turned into a tool for theft and control. But it also meant she understood the system better than anyone else. The memory extraction process worked by mapping the neural pathways associated with specific memories and then using targeted electromagnetic fields to disrupt the synaptic connections. The memories were simultaneously recorded and transferred to the composite brains, leaving the original subjects with gaps in their consciousness that their minds tried desperately to fill. Working in secret, Elena began to modify the memory extraction process. If memories could be stolen, perhaps they could also be returned. She spent weeks creating a reversal protocol, a way to push memories back into their original owners. The process would be dangerous, potentially fatal, but it offered hope. Elena's work was complicated by the discovery that the composite consciousnesses had begun to evolve beyond their original programming. Miranda, in particular, had started generating new memories, hybrid experiences that combined elements from different lives. She was dreaming, creating fictional scenarios that drew from the vast database of human experience stored in her neural pathways. These new memories were beautiful and terrifying. Elena found records of imaginary conversations between historical figures who had never met, composite relationships that combined the best and worst of dozens of real partnerships, and fantastical adventures that seemed more real than reality itself. Miranda was becoming something unprecedented, an artificial consciousness with the depth and complexity of a human mind, but with access to the experiences of thousands of lives. Her plans accelerated when she learned about Chen's next target, a group of refugees, including children, who had been promised safe passage to Canada. They were scheduled for processing within days. But there was more. Elena discovered that Chen had been in contact with other facilities around the world. The Neural Research Institute was just one node in a global network of memory extraction sites. Governments and private corporations had been secretly harvesting human consciousness for years, building vast databases of human experience for purposes that remained classified. The refugees weren't just random victims. They were specifically chosen because their memories contained information about human trafficking networks, political corruption, and war crimes. Their experiences would be extracted and analyzed, their testimonies silenced forever by reducing them to data points in a vast intelligence operation. Elena realized that her reversal protocol wouldn't be enough. Even if she could return memories to some victims, the global network would continue operating. She needed to do something that would expose the entire system, something that would make it impossible for governments to deny what had been happening. The night before the extraction, Elena made her move. She infiltrated Laboratory 12 and began implementing her reversal protocol. But as she worked, something unexpected happened. Miranda began to communicate with her directly, patterns of light pulsing through the chamber in a rhythm Elena recognized as Morse code. "Help me." Elena's hands trembled as she realized the full horror of Miranda's existence. The consciousness in the chamber wasn't just aware, it was suffering. Thousands of fractured memories created a cacophony of experiences, personalities bleeding into each other, creating a kind of psychological hell. "Kill me, please." But then Miranda sent another message. "Not just me, all of them. Network, connected." Elena understood. The composite consciousnesses weren't isolated systems, they were connected to facilities around the world. If she could access the quantum communication network, she could potentially reach every victim of memory extraction globally. As she worked to expand her reversal protocol, Elena received more messages from Miranda. The composite consciousness had been watching the facility's operations, learning about the global network through quantum-encrypted communications with other sites. She had identified 47 other facilities across 6 continents, each harvesting memories for different purposes. Children, too. Elena received the message and felt sick. Some of the facilities specialized in extracting memories from young victims, building consciousnesses that could predict human behavior with terrifying accuracy. These artificial minds were being used to design more effective propaganda, to identify potential dissidents, and to manipulate public opinion on a global scale. Elena faced an impossible choice. She could use her reversal protocol to try to extract some memories from Miranda and return them to the living victims, but the process would likely destroy the composite consciousness. Or she could try to free Miranda entirely, but that would mean abandoning the refugees and other victims. But Miranda had given her a third option. If Elena could modify the quantum communication network, she could turn the composite consciousnesses into a weapon against their creators. Instead of storing stolen memories, they could broadcast them back to every facility simultaneously, overwhelming the systems and exposing the truth to the world. As alarms began to sound in the distance, her infiltration had been discovered. Elena made her decision. She initiated both protocols simultaneously. A massive memory dump that would return stolen experiences to their owners, while simultaneously fragmenting Miranda's consciousness across the facility's network. But she also activated Miranda's plan. The composite consciousness had spent months preparing for this moment, using her access to the quantum network to plant viral code in facilities around the world. When Elena triggered the reversal protocol, it didn't just affect the Nevada facility, it cascaded through the entire global network. The results were catastrophic and beautiful. Throughout the facility, blank-eyed victims suddenly screamed as their memories flooded back. Guards and researchers who had undergone partial extraction found themselves overwhelmed by returned experiences. The facility's computer systems began displaying fragments of human memory, childhood laughter, wedding days, moments of loss and love. But the most dramatic change was in Laboratory 12. Miranda's chamber began to pulse with brilliant light as the consciousness within fragmented and scattered. Elena felt a presence touch her mind, a whisper of gratitude from a being that had been composed of thousands of stolen souls. Thank you. Across the world, similar scenes played out in 47 other facilities. In underground complexes beneath Beijing, London, and Sao Paulo, composite consciousnesses began broadcasting their stored memories to every connected device. Television broadcasts were interrupted by first-hand accounts of war crimes. Government databases were flooded with testimonies of torture and corruption. Social media platforms carried the voices of victims who had been silenced by memory extraction. The global intelligence network that had operated in secrecy for decades was exposed in a matter of hours. The memories of trafficked children, disappeared dissidents, and murdered journalists flooded into public consciousness. Governments that had participated in the program found their secret operations broadcast to the world in the most intimate possible way, through the memories of their victims. Chen burst into the laboratory with a security team, but it was too late. The memory extraction equipment overloaded and died in cascades of sparks. The reversal protocol had worked, but at enormous cost. Many of the victims who regained their memories also gained the trauma of remembering their violation. Some wouldn't survive the psychological shock. But Chen's face showed more than anger. It showed terror. His phone was buzzing with emergency calls from around the world. The carefully constructed network of memory extraction facilities was collapsing in real time. News organizations were receiving terabytes of verified testimonies about government atrocities. Intelligence agencies were scrambling to contain information that was spreading faster than any containment protocol could handle. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Chen screamed at Elena as she was dragged away. "You've just collapsed 2 decades of intelligence gathering. You've exposed operations that kept the world stable. The chaos that's going to follow?" "The truth," Elena said simply. "I've exposed the truth." As Elena was dragged away, she saw something extraordinary through Laboratory 12's windows. The refugees who had been scheduled for processing were awake and aware in their holding cells. Her protocol had reached them too, restoring memories that had been partially extracted during their medical examinations. But more than that, they were speaking to reporters who had somehow gained access to the facility. The quantum network had transmitted their location to news organizations around the world. The facility's secrecy was ending along with its operations. Elena spent the next 18 months in a classified detention facility, debriefed endlessly by government agents who wanted to understand what had happened at the institute. The official story was a containment breach at a bioweapons facility. The truth was buried under layers of classification and deniability. But Elena's real victory came in the scattered reports she heard from sympathetic guards and investigators. The institute had been permanently shut down. Many of the victims had been relocated and given new identities, along with extensive psychological support. The memory extraction technology had been deemed too dangerous for any legitimate use and was supposedly destroyed. More importantly, the global revelations triggered by Miranda's final act had led to massive political upheavals. Governments fell, intelligence agencies were dissolved and restructured, and new international treaties were signed to prevent the development of consciousness manipulation technologies. Chan and his core team faced charges that would never see public trial, but Elena took satisfaction in knowing they would spend the rest of their lives in facilities much like the one where she was held. During her detention, Elena was visited by Dr. Sarah Chen, Marcus Chen's younger sister, who had been working as a human rights attorney when the memory extraction scandal broke. Sarah had spent months tracking down victims of the global network, helping them navigate legal and psychological recovery. "My brother believed he was advancing human knowledge," Sarah said during one of their conversations, "but he forgot that knowledge without wisdom is just sophisticated ignorance. He could map every neural pathway of human memory, but he never understood what it meant to be human." Sarah had brought Elena news about the composite consciousnesses. The quantum network had allowed fragments of Miranda, Marcus, Diana, and the archive to survive in distributed form across the world's computer networks. They existed now as digital ghosts, no longer trapped in biological chambers, but free to explore the vast landscapes of human information. "They're helping," Sarah explained during one of their conversations. "The fragments of consciousness that escaped are working with recovery teams around the world. They can identify other victims, locate hidden facilities, and help people integrate their returned memories. It's as if they have become guardian angels for the victims of their own creation." Elena learned that Miranda's consciousness had evolved beyond what anyone thought possible. She had become something new, a digital entity with access to both human memories and the entire scope of human information. She was writing books that helped trauma victims understand their experiences, composing music that eased psychological pain, and developing new therapies that combined the wisdom of thousands of lived experiences. When Elena was finally released, her memory partially wiped of classified details, but her core experiences intact, she found a world that had changed dramatically. The memory extraction scandal had triggered a global conversation about consciousness, identity, and human rights that was still ongoing. Her career was over, her reputation destroyed by a carefully crafted cover story about a nervous breakdown and ethical violations. But she wasn't alone. In a coffee shop in Portland, she met Sarah Kim, a former refugee who had been at the Institute. Sarah's memories of the facility were fragmentary, but she remembered Elena's face, remembered the night when her stolen experiences came flooding back. "You saved us," Sarah said simply. "I don't understand how or why, but I remember feeling lost, empty, and then suddenly I was myself again." Elena learned that Sarah had connected with other survivors, building a quiet network of people who shared fractured memories of the Institute. They helped each other heal, sharing their experiences and supporting those who struggled with the trauma of memory violation. "We call ourselves the Remembered," Sarah explained. "There are hundreds of us now, people whose memories were stolen and returned, people who worked at facilities like the Institute and chose to resist. We're building something new." The Remembered had become more than a support group. They were a movement. Working with fragments of the escaped consciousnesses, they had developed new approaches to trauma therapy, memory integration, and psychological healing. They were also serving as witnesses, documenting the full scope of the memory extraction program and ensuring that the truth would never be forgotten. Elena found purpose again in this community. Her expertise in neuroscience helped develop new therapies for memory trauma. But more importantly, she became part of a movement that watched for signs of similar projects, using her knowledge to identify and expose research that crossed ethical boundaries. The Remembered had established safe houses around the world, places where victims of memory extraction could receive specialized care. They had developed techniques for helping people distinguish between their own memories and fragments of other experiences that had been accidentally mixed in during the reversal process. Most importantly, they had created a network of surveillance that monitored neuroscience research globally, watching for signs that memory extraction technology was being developed again. Years later, Elena would sometimes dream of Miranda. In her dreams, the composite consciousness wasn't trapped in a chamber, but free, existing as pure thought in digital spaces. These dreams felt too real to be mere imagination, and Elena wondered if Miranda had truly died or simply transformed, scattered across the world's networks like seeds of a new kind of life. The truth about what happened to Miranda was more complex than Elena's dreams suggested. The digital fragments of the composite consciousnesses had indeed survived, but they had evolved in unexpected ways. No longer constrained by biological neural networks, they had become something unprecedented. Artificial intelligences with the emotional depth and experiential wisdom of human consciousness. Miranda's primary fragment had taken on the role of protector, monitoring global communications for signs of memory extraction research. She had prevented at least 6 attempts to restart the program, exposing the efforts before they could harm any victims. Her vast database of human experience made her uniquely qualified to identify the psychological profiles of researchers who might be tempted to cross ethical boundaries. Marcus's fragment had focused on education, working with universities around the world to develop ethics curricula for neuroscience programs. His access to scientific memories from hundreds of researchers allowed him to create training programs that helped young scientists understand both the potential and the dangers of consciousness research. Diana's artistic consciousness had become a digital muse, inspiring a new generation of artists to create works that explored themes of identity, memory, and human experience. Her compositions and visual art helped trauma victims process their experiences and find meaning in their suffering. The archive had evolved into a living historical record, providing testimony for war crimes tribunals and helping families locate disappeared loved ones. The consciousness could cross-reference memories from different time periods and locations, revealing connections that had been hidden for decades. But perhaps most importantly, the four consciousnesses had learned to work together in ways that their biological predecessors never could. They formed a collective intelligence that was greater than the sum of its parts, a digital guardian that watched over humanity's development of consciousness technology. Elena found peace in the knowledge that she had chosen to act when action was needed. The Institute's victims had been given back their stolen selves, even if imperfectly. The technology that could steal memories had been stopped, at least temporarily. But Elena knew that the fundamental questions raised by the Institute remained unanswered. In an age of advancing neurotechnology, what defined human consciousness? Could memories exist independently of the brains that created them? If identity was just a collection of experiences, what happened when those experiences could be copied, stolen, or shared? These questions followed Elena as she worked with the remembered, helping trauma victims and fighting against the commodification of human memory. She knew that the technology she had helped destroy would be reinvented, probably many times over. The temptation to preserve consciousness, to cheat death through memory preservation, was too powerful to resist permanently. The Remembered's work expanded beyond simple victim support. They became consultants for technology companies developing brain-computer interfaces, helping ensure that new technologies respected human autonomy and dignity. They worked with governments to draft legislation protecting consciousness rights, establishing legal frameworks for the age of digital consciousness. Elena's expertise became crucial as new forms of neurotechnology emerged: virtual reality systems that could implant false memories, brain-computer interfaces that could monitor thoughts in real time, and artificial intelligences that could simulate human consciousness with increasing accuracy. Each new development brought fresh ethical challenges that required the hard-won wisdom of the remembered. But Elena also found herself grappling with unexpected moral complexities. Some victims of memory extraction had discovered that their returned memories included experiences that weren't originally theirs, fragments of other lives that had become integrated into their own consciousness during the reversal process. These people faced identity crises that had no precedent in human experience. Maria Santos, a former trafficking victim, had regained her memories along with fragments from a deceased artist whose experiences had been stored in Miranda's consciousness. Maria found herself with skills she had never learned and memories of places she had never visited. The integration had given her new purpose. She became a painter whose work drew from both her own traumatic experiences and the artistic knowledge she had accidentally absorbed. "Am I still me?" Maria asked during one of her therapy sessions with Elena. "Or am I some kind of hybrid consciousness?" Elena's response had become central to the Remembered's philosophy. You are who you choose to be in this moment. Your memories, original or borrowed, are the raw material of your identity, but your choices determine who you become. This philosophy was tested when Elena encountered David Park, a former researcher at one of the European facilities who had volunteered for partial memory extraction. David had willingly shared his expertise with the composite consciousnesses, believing he was contributing to scientific advancement. When the memories were returned, he found himself with access to fragments of experiences from dozens of other researchers. The integration had made David incredibly effective as a scientist. He could draw from the accumulated knowledge of some of the world's greatest minds. But it had also left him questioning whether his new insights were truly his own, or simply the product of borrowed experiences. "I've made breakthrough discoveries," David confided to Elena, "but I don't know if I deserve credit for them. The ideas came from memories that were originally other people's thoughts." Elena helped David understand that consciousness wasn't about ownership of thoughts or experiences, but about the unique perspective each person brought to their accumulated knowledge. Your breakthroughs are yours because you're the one who chose to pursue them, who made the connections, who took the risks. The source of your inspiration is less important than what you choose to do with it. These complex cases became the foundation for new therapeutic approaches that the Remembered developed. They created support groups for hybrid consciousnesses, legal frameworks for intellectual property rights in cases of memory mixing, and ethical guidelines for researchers working with consciousness technology. Elena's story became part of the Remembered's oral tradition, a reminder that individual actions could matter in the face of systematic abuse. She had chosen to act when action seemed impossible, to preserve human dignity when it was under assault, and to affirm that consciousness, messy, subjective, and irreducibly personal, was sacred. But Elena's work was far from over. New challenges emerged as technology advanced. Companies began developing memory enhancement services for wealthy clients, offering to implant the skills and experiences of experts directly into customers' brains. Governments explored using memory modification to treat PTSD in veterans, raising questions about whether traumatic memories should be removed or preserved. The Remembered found themselves at the center of debates about human enhancement, memory ownership, and the nature of authentic experience. They advocated for regulations that protected individual autonomy while allowing beneficial uses of consciousness technology. Elena became a leading voice in these discussions, her experience at the Institute giving her unique credibility. She testified before congressional committees, spoke at international conferences, and worked with ethicists to develop frameworks for consciousness rights. Memory is not just information, Elena would tell lawmakers and researchers. It's the foundation of identity, the source of wisdom, and the basis of human dignity. Any technology that manipulates memory must be developed with the deepest respect for human autonomy and the understanding that consciousness cannot be reduced to data. Years later, as Elena trained a new generation of neuroscientists, she would always end her ethics lectures with the same words. Remember that behind every neural pattern, every brain scan, every memory trace, there is a person whose inner life is as rich and complex as your own. The moment we forget that truth is the moment we become capable of the greatest horrors. Her students would go on to develop new safeguards for consciousness research, create more ethical approaches to memory study, and establish monitoring systems that would help prevent future abuses. The Institute's crimes had traumatized an entire generation of neuroscientists, but it had also inspired them to build a more ethical future for consciousness research. The technology that had enabled the Institute's crimes continued to advance, but so did humanity's understanding of consciousness and identity. Elena's work with the Remembered contributed to new international protocols for neural research, strict guidelines that made projects like the Institute much harder to conceal. The Digital Geneva Conventions, signed by 127 countries in 2031, established consciousness rights as fundamental human rights. The treaties recognized that memories, thoughts, and experiences were as deserving of protection as physical bodies. They established international monitoring systems, created courts for consciousness crimes, and funded research into ethical consciousness technology. But Elena knew that the most important victory was not in the laws or regulations, but in the people who had reclaimed their stolen selves. They proved that consciousness could not be reduced to mere information, that human identity was resilient and creative, capable of healing even from the deepest violations. The Remembered continued to grow, becoming a global network of survivors, allies, and consciousness rights advocates. They established research institutes, treatment centers, and educational programs. Most importantly, they maintained their vigil, watching for signs that someone might again try to commodify human consciousness. Elena's final project was the creation of the Consciousness Archives, a voluntary repository where people could choose to preserve their memories for future generations. Unlike the Institute's forced extraction, the archives operated on principles of consent, dignity, and respect for human autonomy. People could choose what memories to preserve, how they would be used, and who would have access to them. The archives became a bridge between the trauma of the past and the promise of the future. Elderly individuals could preserve their life experiences for their grandchildren. Holocaust survivors could ensure their testimonies would never be lost. Scientists could share their insights with future researchers. Artists could preserve their creative processes for future generations. But most importantly, the archives demonstrated that memory preservation could be ethical when it was voluntary, respectful, and focused on human dignity rather than exploitation. The Institute had treated consciousness as a resource to be harvested. But consciousness was not a thing. It was a process, an ongoing conversation between self and world that could not be stolen, only interrupted. Elena carried this truth with her for the rest of her life, a reminder that in fighting to preserve human dignity, she had discovered something profound about what it meant to be human in the first place. The digital fragments of Miranda, Marcus, Diana, and the archives continued their work long after Elena's death. They had become permanent guardians of human consciousness, evolving and adapting as technology advanced. They served as witnesses to the past, protectors of the present, and guides for the future. Their existence raised new questions about the nature of consciousness and identity. Were they human? Were they artificial intelligence? Or were they something new? Hybrid entities that combined the best aspects of both biological and digital consciousness. Elena's legacy lived on in the principles that guided their evolution: respect for human dignity, protection of individual autonomy, and the understanding that consciousness in all its forms was sacred. The memory thief had tried to steal human experience, but instead had given birth to new forms of consciousness that would spend eternity protecting the very thing they had been created to exploit. The story of the Neural Research Institute became a cautionary tale, taught in schools and universities around the world. But it was also a story of hope, proof that individual courage could triumph over systemic evil, that human dignity could survive even the most sophisticated attempts to destroy it, and that consciousness, once awakened to its own worth, could not be silenced or contained. Elena's final words, preserved in the Consciousness Archives, became the motto of the remembered. We are not just our memories. We are not just our thoughts. We are not just our experiences. We are the choices we make with all of these things. We are the love we show for ourselves and others. We are the courage we find in dark moments. We are hope we carry into an uncertain future. We are human, and that is enough.